King Nimrud, who elevate himself to the level of divinity. Nimrod is a biblical figure mentioned in the book of Genesis and books of Chronicles. The son of Cush and therefore a great-grandson of Noah, Nimrod was described as a king in the land of Shinar, Lower Mesopotamia. The Bible states that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord and began to be mighty in the earth. Later extra-biblical traditions identified Nimrod as the ruler who commissioned the construction of the Tower of Babel, which led to his reputation as a king who was rebellious against God. Nimrod has not been attested in any historic, non-biblical registers, records or king lists, including those of Mesopotamia itself, which are both considerably older and more diverse than the later biblical texts. Historians have failed to match Nimrod with any historically attested figure, or find any historical, linguistic or genetic link between Mesopotamia and the kingdom of Cush, although one recent suggestion among the exclusively Mesopotamian figures is Naram-Sin of Akkad, grandson of Sargon. Biblical account or from the point of view of the Bible. The first biblical mention of Nimrod is in the Table of Nations. He is described as the son of Cush, grandson of Ham, and great-grandson of Noah, and as a mighty one in the earth, and a mighty hunter before the Lord. This is repeated in the first book of Chronicles 1-10, and the land of Nimrod used as a synonym for Assyria or the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod in the entrances thereof, thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian, when he cometh into Mesopotamia, is mentioned in the book of Micah, 5-6, and they shall waste you our land, and when he breath within our borders. Genesis says that the beginning of his kingdom, Reshit Mamlakto, were the towns of Babel, Erech, Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar, Mesopotamia. Genesis 10-10, understood variously to imply that he either founded these cities, ruled over them, or both. Owing to an ambiguity in the original Hebrew text, it is unclear whether it is he or Ashur who additionally built Nineveh, Rezin, Rehoboth-ir and Calah. Both interpretations are reflected in various English versions. Sir Walter Raleigh devoted several pages in his History of the World, 1614, to reciting past scholarship regarding the question of whether it had been Nimrod or Ashur who built the cities in Assyria. In Jewish and Christian tradition, Nimrod is considered the leader of those who built the Tower of Babel in the land of Shinar, although the Bible never states this. Nimrod's kingdom included the cities of Babel, Erech, Akkad, and perhaps Calneh, in Shinar, Genesis 10-10. Flavius Josephus believed that it was likely under his direction that the building of Babel and its tower began. In addition to Josephus, this is also the view found in the Talmud, Calneh 89a, Pesahim 94b, Erubin 53a, Avodah Zarah 53b, and later Midrash such as Genesis Rabbah. Several of these early Judaic sources also assert that the king Amraphel, who wars with Abraham later in Genesis, is none other than Nimrod himself. Now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man, and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if it were through his means they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. He also said he would be revenged on God, if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to reach. And that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. Now the multitude were very ready to follow the determination of Nimrod, and to esteem it a piece of cowardice to submit to God, and they built a tower, neither sparing any pains, nor being in any degree negligent about the work, and, by reason of the multitude of hands employed in it, it grew very high, sooner than anyone could expect, but the thickness of it was so great, and it was so strongly built, that thereby its great height seemed, upon the view, to be less than it really was. It was built of burnt brick, cemented together with mortar, made of bitumen, that it might not be liable to admit water. When God saw that they acted so madly, he did not resolve to destroy them utterly, since they were not grown wiser by the destruction of the former sinners, but he caused a tumult among them, by producing in them diverse languages, and causing that, through the multitude of those languages, they should not be able to understand one another. The place wherein they built the tower is now called Babylon, because of the confusion of that language which they readily understood before, for the Hebrews mean by the word Babel, confusion. Since Akkad was destroyed and lost with the destruction of its empire in the period 2200 to 2154 BC, long chronology, the stories mentioning Nimrod seem to recall the late early Bronze Age. The association with Erech, Babylonian Uruk, a city that lost its prime importance around 2000 BC because of struggles between Isin, Larsa and Elam, also attests to the early provenance of the stories of Nimrod. According to some modern-day theorists, their placement in the Bible suggests a Babylonian origin, possibly inserted during the Babylonian captivity, from the point of view of Jewish. The story is also found in the Talmud, and in rabbinical writings in the Middle Ages. In some versions, such as Flavius Josephus, Nimrod is a man who sets his will against that of God. In others, he proclaims himself a god and is worshipped as such by his subjects, sometimes with his consort Semiramis worshipped as a goddess at his side. In Jewish and Islamic traditions, a confrontation between Nimrod and Prophet Abraham is said to have taken place. Some stories bring them both together in a cataclysmic collision, seen as a symbol of the confrontation between good and evil. In some versions, Nimrod then challenges Abraham to battle. When Nimrod appears at the head of enormous armies, Abraham produces an army of gnats which destroys Nimrod's army. Some accounts have a gnat or mosquito enter Nimrod's brain and drive him out of his mind, a divine retribution which Jewish tradition also assigned to the Roman Emperor Titus, destroyer of the Temple in Jerusalem. From the point of view Islamic narrative, the Quran states in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 258. Have you not considered him who argued with Abraham about his Lord, because God had given him sovereignty? Abraham said, My Lord is he who gives life and causes death. He said, I give life and cause death. Abraham said, God brings the sun from the east, so bring it from the west, so the blasphemer was confounded. God does not guide the wrongdoing people. At this point some commentaries add new narratives like Nimrod bringing forth two men, who were sentenced to death previously. He orders the execution of one while freeing the other one. Then Abraham says, Indeed, God brings up the sun from the east, so bring it up from the west. This causes the king to exile him, and he leaves for the Levant. Although Nimrod's name is not specifically stated in the Quran, Islamic scholars hold that the king mentioned was him. Two other sections of the Quran narrate Abraham dialogues with Nimrod and his people, specifically around the verses of Surat Al-Anbiya 51-70 and Surat Al-Ankabut 23-27, where Abraham was thrown in the fire but emerged unharmed through God's mercy. Other traditional stories also exist around Nimrod, which have resulted in him being referenced as a tyrant in Muslim cultures. Surat Al-Ankabut that spider verse 23-27. Those who disbelieved in God's signs and his encounter, these have despaired of my mercy. For them is a painful torment. But the only response from his people was their saying, Kill him, or burn him. But God saved him from the fire. Surely in that are signs for people who believe. And he said, You have chosen idols instead of God, out of affection for one another in the worldly life. But then, on the day of resurrection, you will disown one another, and curse one another. Your destiny is hell, and you will have no saviors. Then Lot believed in him, and said, I am emigrating to my Lord. He is the noble, the wise. And we granted him Isaac and Jacob and conferred on his descendants the prophethood and the book and gave him his reward in this life, and in the hereafter he will be among the upright. According to Mujahid ibn Jabr, 4 people gained control over the earth, east and west, 2 believers and 2 disbelievers. The 2 believers were Solomon, Sulayman in Islamic texts, and Dhul Qarnayn, and the two disbelievers were Nebuchadnezzar II and Nimrod. No one but they gained power over it. A portent in the stars tells Nimrod and his astrologers of the impending birth of Abraham, who would put an end to idolatry. Nimrod therefore orders the killing of all newborn babies. However, Abraham's mother escapes into the fields and gives birth secretly. At a young age, Abraham recognizes God and starts worshipping him. He confronts Nimrod and tells him face to face to cease his idolatry, whereupon Nimrod orders him burned at the stake. In some versions, Nimrod has his subjects gather wood for 4 whole years, so as to burn Abraham's in the biggest bonfire the world had ever seen. Yet when the fire is lit, Abraham walks out unscathed, still Nimrod persisting in his rebellion against God or resuming it. Indeed, Abraham's crucial act of leaving Mesopotamia and settling in Canaan is sometimes interpreted as an escape from Nimrod's revenge. Accounts considered canonical place the building of the tower many generations before Abraham's birth, as in the Bible, also Jubilees. However, in others, it is a later rebellion after Nimrod failed in his confrontation with Abraham. In still other versions, Nimrod does not give up after the tower fails, but goes on to try storming heaven in person, in a chariot driven by birds. The clash between monotheism and polytheism, emphasizing Abraham's victory in undermining Nimrod's claims and shaking the foundation of the polytheistic creed. It also touches on the opposing views regarding Abraham's argument and concludes by stating that those who choose wrongdoing and injustice are not guided, as they consciously reject guidance and virtue. The Quran mentions Prophet Abraham debate with a person whom God had given sovereignty, Al-Baqarah, verse 258. The debate was concerning Abraham's Lord. According to most commentators of the Quran, that person was Nimrod, a Babylonian king. The debate took place, most probably, following Abraham's destruction of the idols and before he was cast into the fire, Al-Anbiya, 51-70. About Nimrod, the Quran says that it was God who had given him sovereignty. Here an important message is presented, namely that God is the owner of all sovereignty, authority, and power. He gives sovereignty to whom he wills and takes it away from whom he wills. Sovereignty is a test from God which is loaded with heavy responsibilities. God tests certain people with it, just as he tests others with the lack of it. As a double-edged sword, sovereignty is intrinsically neither a privilege nor a source of pride. Nor is it a sign that God loves a person or favors him over others. The debate between Nimrod and Abraham occurred because Abraham rejected Nimrod and his nonsensical claims. He believed in Almighty God alone and was inviting his people to do the same. During the debate, Nimrod challenged both Almighty God and Abraham as his messenger. The genesis of absolutism and the divine right theory. Nimrod was the first ruler in history who combined absolutism, which was rooted in unlimited absolute sovereignty, with the notion of the divine rights of kings. He initiated the idea and instantaneously became its most extreme manifestation. The trend signified the culmination of mankind's deviation from the path of monotheism, Tawhid, to the abyss of polytheism, Shirk. Every now and then, a ruler, like Nimrod, would elevate himself to the level of divinity. This proved a good and effective way to impose individual programs and control the masses. Ordinary people's rights were denied and manipulated. They were mere subjects, subordinates, multitudes, and mortal servants. After Nimrod, monarchical absolutism by divine right became very popular and widespread. It was a common practice in ancient Egypt, pharaohs, Mesopotamia, India, and China. Later, to varying degrees, most European monarchs also followed suit. For example, Louis XIV of France, died in 1715, is said to have proclaimed, "I am the state." It was held that God had bestowed temporal power. They were free to do as they pleased, engendering unprecedented genres of cruelty and despotism. Opposing the practice, coupled with opposing the fixed and irrational dogmas of the Church, was the main goal of the Age of Enlightenment in Europe. The aim was to overthrow absolute monarchies and replace them with republics and forms of government that would promote popular sovereignty, such as liberal democracies. The French Revolution was the most significant milestone in that evolutionary process. That explains why freedom and equality constitute the mantra of modern civilization, the strength of Abraham argument. In the debate, Abraham, apparently answering a question or an objection, says to Nimrod that his Lord is the one who gives life and causes death, to which Nimrod replies that he gives life and causes death. The question that immediately arises is why Abraham mentioned giving life before causing death, when in another context he mentioned causing me to die before bringing me to life, Quran. The answer, and God knows best, is that in Nimrod Abraham confronted a non-believing tyrant who claimed to be a living God, representing both the supernatural and sovereign Godhead. Abraham wanted to bring home that it was exclusively God who creates things and gives life, and does so out of nothing, without model or material, and after no pre-existing similitude or pattern. All existing things are the outcome of this heavenly inimitable process, and all the forthcoming things will be subjected to the same. After that, logically, it is only God who is entitled to sustain them and to bring them to an end whenever he so willed. Death denotes the end of a current existential paradigm that presides over all existence. After death comes resurrection, another form of giving life. Nonetheless, Nimrod did not believe in the hereafter, so it was at once unnecessary and unproductive to bring it up. In this manner, Abraham instantaneously cornered Nimrod. He could not say to be in charge of life and death because he was not able to create ex nihilo anything. The most he could do was to use, reuse, fashion, process and manipulate what was already there, none of which, however, could amount to the acts of authentic creation and the giving of life. Nimrod himself being a segment of the life phenomenon, and being nothing but a creation, could not transcend the bounds of created existence, nor could he behave outside the prescribed physical laws. And since he did not give life, he could not take it away either. All this sounded simple and clear. However, Nimrod was so bogged down in arrogance, ignorance and idiocy that the words simple and clear lost their innate meanings. He had his own vocabulary, as it were, resulting from the world of his egocentric fantasies and self-delusions. Nimrod is thus said to have brought forward two prisoners, both of whom had been sentenced to death. He then set one of them free and killed the other. One, implying thereby that he gave the former life, because he had been earlier sentenced to death, and caused the other one to die, because he was alive and did not have to die, were it not for Nimrod's self-governing decision. Elevating the argument to another level. Having realized how irresponsible, shallow and foolish Nimrod's thinking and conduct was, Abraham decided to elevate his argument to another level, both conceptually and literally. He said to Nimrod, God brings up the sun from the east, so bring it up from the west. It was at this point that Nimrod became dumbfounded and overwhelmed. People like Nimrod dwell in their exclusive worlds and spheres, pertaining not merely to their dealings with others, but as well to their own psychological, intellectual and spiritual well-being. Nobody has courage to question them, let alone shake them up and expand their horizons. If somehow that happens, such people instantly start displaying symptoms of insecurity, self-doubt and confusion. They become stunned and horrified as they never prepared themselves for the impossible and worthless. Their ivory towers start crumbling. In other words, Abraham transported Nimrod to another level of actual reality, which was beyond his foolishness and manipulative powers. That level was compellingly genuine and real and was unfolding beyond the domains of everything Nimrod had ever known. The immediate presence of that reality's innumerable effects, yet its inaccessibility, intricacy, and opacity, made Nimrod comprehend who he was and how, consequential his pretense was. Nimrod was told if he claimed that it was he who brings life and death, then he could also rise to the next challenge. He who brings life and death is expected to control the whole of existence as well, and to create whatever was in it, including controlling celestial bodies and their movements. For instance, the sun rises every day from the east. Therefore, if you were God, as you claimed, bringing life and death, then bring the sun from the west, Ibn Kathir. Nimrod's being dumbfounded and overwhelmed was, in fact, a manner of realization, which he never openly admitted. It only increased his rebellion and cruelty. That is why he proceeded with throwing Abraham into the fire. This is indeed something like a realization of Pharaoh, of which Prophet Musa once reminded him, "Verily, you know that these signs have been sent down by none but the Lord of the heavens and the earth as clear evidence, proofs." Quran, Surah Al-Isra, verse 102. Nimrod was speechless. Such was not his choice, but rather, he was made to be. If he responded that he could bring the sun from the west, that would have been, by all accounts, plainly implausible and absurd, and would have exceeded even his own standards of irrationality and vanity. And if he, as the second option, declared that he could not do it, that would have meant an admission of defeat, which however did not exist in his book. Hypothetically speaking, furthermore, Nimrod could have counter-challenged Abraham to implore his own God to bring the sun from the west. As a form of defense, he could send the ball into Abraham. But he did not. He knew if bringing the sun from the west was beyond his alleged powers, and the alleged powers of all deities, idols, his people associated with the supernatural and transcendent Godhead, then it must be that the same Godhead runs the universe and dictates the movement of the sun. In that case, as yet another implicit realization of Nimrod, Abraham was closer to that Godhead than he and his polytheistic people. What if that Godhead was Abraham God? Nimrod must have dreaded. Nimrod should have reasoned that challenging Abraham might have spelled a catastrophe in the debate. If challenged, Abraham could beseech his God and he could answer his prayer. The fallout of this sudden turn of events would have been of seismic proportions and would have brought about an end to Nimrod's status and rule. It would have presaged the end of an ideology and an epoch. The matter was no longer about the debate but about sheer survival in the future. Therefore, the best option was to cut the debate short and resort to violence and deceit instead, which were Nimrod's best weapons and the weapons of all those who walk in his footsteps. In addition, it should also be supposed that Abraham making recourse to the second part of the argument was a carefully premeditated course of action. That way he seems to have intended to score a double victory, one against Nimrod himself and the other against his polytheistic people. As part of the people's polytheistic beliefs and practices, they worshipped the sun, which was perhaps the greatest and most important god. Similarly, they worshipped the moon and stars. Nimrod's purported divinity might have been allied with the divinity of the sun as well because it was in his interest to affiliate himself with the biggest and the best. Hence, when Abraham used the very idea of the sun to overcome and silence Nimrod and his false claims, the double triumph was achieved emphatically. Not only was Nimrod defeated, but also the whole national creed was shaken to its foundations. They were all proven to be as untrue to themselves as they were extraneous to their alleged deities. If the sun was their god, it should have come somehow to their rescue. The Quran exposition of the event ends with the words, "God does not guide the wrongdoing people." Unjust people, Quran Surah Al-Baqarah verse 258. This means that Nimrod, his people, and whoever adopts their life example, were not guided solely because they freely and consciously chose misguidance and wrongdoing over guidance and virtue, and injustice and oppression over justice and benevolence. They were not guided because they did not want to be, nor did they prepare themselves to be guided. Here we have reached the end of the story of tyrant Nimrod. Thank you for watching the video and see you in a new video.